Thanks. Songs, Lynn, that's a good one. Oh, pets. Yeah. One washcloth. Sarah and April, okay. You obviously studied up before our webinar started tonight. Oh, bed facing the river and cats at my side. Oh, Nancy, that sounds like a good weekend any given time, not just at the end of life. That's awesome. Well, we will let folks in if they keep showing up. One more comment. Have my good friend direct my body care and home funeral. I just made those plans too. Yeah, so that's what friends are for, right? I agree. Well, without further chit chat, let's get started. My name is Penny, and I am on the board of the National Home Funeral Alliance. I'm a doula, and I also actually work at a funeral home. Um, and my reason for doing that is I just felt like there was a gap in that in that relationship, and to better serve my clients, I wanted to understand how I could help them all the way through. Um, and tonight we are honored with Susan Oppie, and I'm just going to read a little bit about her bio, and then I'm going to turn it over to her. So Susan has worked as a registered nurse for more than 25 years, and 11 of those years in hospice and palliative care. And in the early part of her career, she became aware of the morbid disconnect with death in the US. And she spent the following years trying to understand this disconnect and what she could do to impact the situation. So she attended mortuary school, researched the history of funeral industry, collected memorial art, and held memorial workshops in libraries and other venues just to help open up that dialogue. She also became involved with the NHFA to help educate and support families. And in 2014, she and two other RNs, Rochelle and Lynn, who I believe both happen to be on our call tonight, they started One Washcloth. And that was just to bring back the art of deathbed ritual in a simple and non-threatening way. So I am so excited to hear more, as I'm sure everybody else is. So Susan, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you.
Okay, Penny, thank you. Let me do this share thing real quick, see if I can remember how to do it. All right, I'm going to say share. Then I'm going to, let's see. All right, let me just get where I need to go here. Okay, can everybody see that screen? Um, all right then, so I'll just get going. And yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much for letting me present tonight. I was sorry I didn't do it last month, but I was sick with the flu and I was also quite depressed actually. I felt like, what was going on in our world around us was just a bit too much for me to kind of come in and focus on this webinar. But again, I was about to lose my voice, and I was more worried about that than anything. But I'm so happy to have this new opportunity to come to you all tonight. And seeing that it's a pretty small group of people, I would be okay if people wanted to ask questions throughout it. Initially, we were thinking maybe we just have questions at the end, but if you have something pressing, just raise your hand, and Penny can monitor all that. So again, I'm Susan Oppie, and yeah, my career as a nurse spanned pretty much 25 years, but I'm no longer putting the RN after my name because I do believe that part of my life, that chapter has ended. Although they say once a nurse, always a nurse, we'll see. But I am grateful for the time I had working in that profession, and it certainly played a role in bringing me here tonight because um, as a registered nurse, I certainly dealt with a whole lot of death, um, and as was mentioned, I served pretty much as 11 years as a hospice nurse. So death was definitely part of my day-to-day practice for those years. Um, and so when you look at this list, pretty much everything on this list brings me here tonight. What I realized was missing and should come between the memorial artist and memorial art advocate and One Washcloth co-founder is the day that I came across the documentary film, A Family Undertaking. Um, I had already been in the memorial art world. I was trying to kind of see how we could open that conversation more into the taboo topic of death. But it was when I saw that documentary that it just blew my mind. And if you, for those of you who don't know what A Family Undertaking is, it's a documentary film put out in like 2004 that followed 4 or 5 families, I think, who chose to care for their own dead by means of a home funeral, which I had no idea was even a possibility. I understood that it was a human right afterwards, but I had no idea it was a legal right. And I remember like watching that film about maybe 8 times in 2 days once I brought it home, because I just was in such disbelief. So and what I really felt after watching that film was just rage. I just felt so angry that our society has been, been kept away from that practice of caring for our own dead, um, and it made me really want to learn why that's happened, why this had become like one of the best kept secrets in the U.S. And so that led me to reaching out to someone who was interviewed in that film and become trained as a home funeral guide with Jerry Grace Lyons. And also I entered mortuary school just to kind of find out what in the world they're teaching there that has kept us, away from this sacred event and sacred ritual opportunity. Um, and so I really dug into the history of the American funeral industry, and it just kind of took my life over. And it was through becoming a home funeral guide that I got involved with the National Home Funeral Alliance, and then that led me to co-found One Washcloth with Rochelle and Lynn. And for those of you who don't know about One Washcloth, it's a charitable initiative that was started after Rochelle shared her story with Lynn and me and Cassandra Yonder about how when she was a psychiatric nurse in a hospital in Canada, she would be called to the emergency room on a regular basis, and oftentimes that included dealing with a death. And after a while, she realized that maybe the best thing she could do was offer the families who were present at the bedside of the person who had died a warm washcloth. And what she saw and what I've seen many times since is just this transformation from some people who feel just shocked and distressed and not knowing what to do to people who've kind of been given agency to, do something that has meaning and is a way of showing love to that person. And it's very empowering for these people. And we believe that it also has helped a lot of people with getting into the grieving process in maybe a smoother way than they would have otherwise. So I'm very proud of the work that One Washcloth has done, even though it's for the most part been a pretty organically growing group or initiative. And we have just, I think, we're close to our 11th year. And even though we didn't start out as a washcloth distributing business, Lynn, I should say, has sent out maybe close to 700 washcloths at this point. So very proud of that. And anyway, so let me just get a little further into this. Um, so to start, I like the idea of starting with a ritual, since kind of that is a big part of what this conversation and presentation's about. So I thought we could just all take a couple deep breaths together and just kind of get grounded and create a community on our internet here. So I'm just going to ask that we all just take one deep breath and let it out. And again, and let it out. And I also thought I would light a candle um, as a part of the ritual and ask if you're so inclined to invite your ancestors to come with us and be part of this gathering today, because it is, after all, what we're kind of covering today is how we became so disconnected from basically our ancestors and our ancestral ways of caring for the dead. And so by bringing them in, I feel like that is certainly serving a purpose, and inviting their wisdom in and whatever else they can offer us. So I'm going to light this candle. And if you feel inclined, just invite your ancestors to be with us tonight. Oh, there's my little candle. So what I'm hoping to convey this evening is just how over the course of a few hundred years, our society has gone from, or not even our society, but our ancestors, and through them, we come to this place. But we've gone from becoming so involved in the sacred caring of the dead and honoring those who've died to becoming a death denying society where not only do we not really get involved with the death care of our loved ones, but we come to this, we've developed this industry now that I think brings in like $18 billion a year. So very far, very distant from where we come from. And so this, to start with, I was just going to show you a little list of, things I've observed in my professional period, as well as a home health aide. And I mean, yeah, as a home, no, not a home health aide, a home funeral guide. And then also my brief time in mortuary school. Um, so as an RN in my early days, I worked for a big city hospital in Boston. And I'm sure it was, this is just how it is in big city hospitals everywhere still probably. But the point was, if a person died, that the focus should be to get that body out of the room, bound to the morgue, get the bed clear and the room clean, and ready for the next person coming in. Um, at the time, I know that I felt uncomfortable with it. I didn't know why exactly, but being a new nurse, you don't really ask a lot of questions, and I didn't. And anyway, so it happened time and time again that we would be, moving this body down to the morgue, not really allowing families to spend all that much time with them, and certainly not the staff, even if the patient had been there for weeks or months. But that's how it was at the time, and I'm guessing it still is. And when I went to mortuary school, it was very clear that it was all about making a business. And I don't know that the word sacred was mentioned at all. But it's been years ago. It might have been mentioned, but that wasn't the over, you know, the feeling that you got when you were in the classes. There was nothing real sacred about any of it. Um, and as a hospice nurse, I think of all the death visits I went on, and one that pops to my mind is when I arrived at the home of an elderly woman, or well, I guess of the daughter of an elderly woman who had died. And as we would always do on our death visits, we'd ask, when do you want the funeral home to come? And so the adult daughter of that woman who died, was thinking about it, but her teenage daughter was present, so the granddaughter of the woman who had died was there, and what I remember her saying is that she was more concerned about the grandmother becoming kind of a zombie, and worried that she would come up, get up off the bed and be up in the night in the home, and she was serious. I remember thinking, my goodness, that's pretty crazy. But it made me think too. After a while, I thought, well, if this is a teenage girl who never, has only seen death through the films, video zombie films, or video games, whatever. If this is her first real experience with death, yeah, I mean, I can see where that's coming from. But it was still sad, and the kind of I think pressured the mother to choose that ask for the funeral home to come sooner than later. And then another death visit that comes to mind is when I had visited a woman who she was dying. I mean, she was minutes away from death when I arrived, and her eyes were open, and but there was no sign of any life. And I'm not sure that I could even hear a heartbeat at that point. But I told the family to come in and do what they needed to do, as she was dying. And the husband came in, laid next to her on the bed, and just as he did that, her eyes closed, and she kind of just finally let go. And so after a little while, there were a lot of people gathered outside, and I went to the husband to talk about the funeral homecoming, and I asked if he'd like to come and help kind of bathe her or prepare her for the funeral home. And his reply was, "That's that's no, that's what I'm paying the funeral home for," which I just found very heartbreaking. And I was just kind of early getting to know the whole home funeral world, and and I wasn't really prepared to say anything else. And but it just I felt it was very sad about that. Um, and then when it's been years ago, I was asked by someone I'd never met, who had gotten my name from my mentor in the home funeral world, Jerry Grace Lyons. I was called and asked if I would be willing to come and help her with a home funeral of a young man who had been murdered. And but she, the mother called her to ask if that was possible. But I'm not sure. I don't know if the mother didn't know the condition of the body. I don't know if the mother even knew how the young man was murdered. But so there wasn't a lot of information we were going on. But I agreed to come and meet her at the house when the body was supposed to be delivered there. And um, unfortunately, as a hospice nurse, I had a lot of supplies in my car that ended up helping quite a lot in dealing with what we the condition of the body that we came to we saw when we got there. But what I first saw when I walked into the house was a what looked like a body, but it was just wrapped up in thick plastic, and it was on like a board. And I think they're called like butter dish kind of boards. I'm remembering that somewhere from the mortuary education, used kind of for transporting the body, but there was no cover on it. It was just this wrapped up body. And and it required us to unwrap it. So, and it just so there were a few people. The mother was there. The woman who called me, a couple people in her family arrived, and then some friends of the dead man were there. And so we started unwrapping the body, and layer by layer, um, we would check in with the mother to see if she was okay, if she wanted to keep unwrapping him, and she would kind of check to see what she could see in the next layer. And she stayed quite a while, but we did start seeing like blood, drops of blood on the plastic. And finally the mother was like, "I need to go. I can't stay here." And so she and the woman who had called me went off, and were no longer in the room. But when we finally unwrapped the whole body, it had been autopsied in the coroner's office, but it hadn't been closed up. It was wide open. The chest was wide open. The abdominal cavity was wide open. The top of the skull had been removed. The brain had been removed, and it was just this flat top, top of the head. Um, and so myself and two of the friends who were there, we got we started doing what we needed to do to put the body back together. Um, and again, fortunately, I had a lot of supplies in my car to kind of help do that. And after a while, I mean, I'll talk about this a little bit more after later on, but we were able to get the chest closed, and they were able to actually have a home funeral for the next 48 hours or so. Um, and so, but again, I'll talk about that a little later. But then, lastly, there was a couple of years ago, I got a call just of a woman. I think she was a birth midwife who got my name off the NHFA website, and asking if the mother could bring. She was in the hospital, and she gave birth to a stillborn baby, and she really wanted to bring her home. The mother wanted to bring the baby home, but she was getting a lot of resistance from the staff in the hospital. And so the woman who's calling me was asking what I knew about, her rights. And I was like, well, I'm sure she has the right to do that, but I'm not familiar with this kind of situation. So anyway, long story short, with the pressure coming from the hospital staff to get the body down to the morgue and not wanting the mother to bring it home, the mother finally agreed to not press it anymore and ended up, just keeping the body in the morgue. Um, anyway, so these for me are just kind of some examples of just our disconnect, and just how things, thinking how things could be so much nicer and more beneficial to everyone if these situations weren't happening in our country. So when I talk about what it is we've lost, with our connection with our ancestors, it's kind of hard to imagine what that all means. But this diagram from the Mormon Church shows, how in 10 generations, each of us has over 4,000 ancestors, which is an awful lot of people, a lot of ancestors, a lot of cultural practices, a lot of rituals, including the death rituals, and a lot of wisdom we've lost, we've become disconnected from. And if you go, 10 generations beyond that, 20 generations back, which I think is about 500 years, we have over 2 million. Each of us has over 2 million ancestors. So again, that's a lot of people we're coming from with a lot of cultural, you know, beauty. There's just something, so much that we've lost with this disconnection. And again, I'm referring obviously to specifically our a disconnect with death. And so I have to wonder, how could that have happened? How can we have become so disconnected from 2 million ancestors, and then even beyond that, more than 2 million ancestors? What kind of powerful forces were involved in cutting us off like that? And so, that's kind of what I hope to summarize in a hopefully a very succinct way here in the next few slides. But then I'll also want to bring in, ways that I'm thinking might help us reconnect. But to start, I'd say one of the big powers that was present in the United States, or even before its inception, was its forced or assimilation of cultures. So whether it was, the assimilation of the indigenous people in our country and how they were forced into these schools where they were forced to wear Western clothes and cut their hair and not speak their language or practice their cultural practices. Um, whether it had with them, and then I also heard that they also were separated because they were forced off of their native lands. They were also separated from their death care practices, which included being near where the burial grounds of their ancestors were. So that was a very traumatic for them. Not, and I'm sure we all know kind of all the other atrocities that occurred, or a lot of them. Or whether it was a forced, assimilation of people coming in as enslaved people on ships, largely from Africa. They were forced into, either doing what they were told by the enslavers, or, oftentimes dying. And I found also that in a lot of situations, probably in most situations, they were denied, their rights to practice their cultural traditions. And oftentimes the enslavers would even use those cultural practices as a way of controlling these people, by just violating the sacredness of the bodies that had died, the people who had died. And I mean, again, I can't imagine everything that went on back then, but just to give you an idea of these, certain ways that people were forced into assimilation. And then there were, people who came here voluntarily, or when they were fleeing famine, or some sort of horrors from their homes. They came here to start a new life, and eventually they all started losing their cultural traditions, and to become more American. So this next slide I like a lot because it kind of speaks to all this. And that's how people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. And when you think of the ancestors as our family tree, to all of a sudden be cut away from that heritage and that tree, it leaves you very lost. And I feel like that is where we've arrived here in this country, very lost. So I just wanted to also then bring up the next industrial complex, or the first industrial complex that I'm listing here today, and that's the funeral industrial complex. And I'm sure many on this call, or probably all of you on this call, know what that's about. We started from a very small place in, these towns as they started expanding into cities, to what we have today of, let me see here, yeah, of viewing, a body from a car. I mean, that's kind of the extremes of where we've come from, just very small kind of livery stable operators and carpenters getting involved in helping families, to, bodies behind bulletproof windows, where people don't really have to get out of their car or even put on their shoes or do anything else to view the body. So, and I read today, just to remind myself, that this industry, makes over $18 billion a year. At least last year they did. So that's we've come quite a far distance from where our ancestors once were. Um, yeah, so in another industrial complex that I think played a big role in this disconnection is the medical industrial complex. Um, Among other things, they refer to death, at least in our society, as a medical event, and they're largely connected with the funeral industry. So oftentimes cutting out the family from being from participating in any way in how the body will be cared for after death. So yeah, they have played a very big role in where we are today as well. Another industry that I think plays a big role, obviously, is the military industrial complex. So not only do they, well, I guess since the Civil War anyway, um, our wars that we fight in this country are primarily are overseas, and we for the most part indiscriminately or support other countries who are involved in wars, but so we don't we bomb things now. We just fly over and just bomb the heck out of towns and things, and not really get a sense of how all the lives have been lost, all the sacred events of deaths of all these people that have occurred. um, and I know when Ukraine was first invaded a few years ago, I remember seeing on the TV, on the news, that they were interviewing a family that was going through rubble to find bodies or body parts even of their loved ones, just so they could you know, create some sort of way to honor that person, and whether it's in some sort of ritual, but just the importance of them finding a body part. That was just very clear. And it turns out that I have found out since that even in the Civil War, families, if they could afford to get to the battlegrounds, they would go to those battlegrounds to find bodies of their loved ones to bring them home. But for the most part, that's another thing about the funeral industry. For those who don't know, I mean, the Civil War certainly gave them a boost by getting the embalming practice going and getting all those bodies sent home by train to back to home where those soldiers came from. But so it was interesting to read that these families during the Civil War would also try to get to the battlegrounds just to find the body parts so they could do something with them to honor that loved one. Um, so here we are with just you know huge destruction, and we know that there's a lot of money to be made in this military industrial complex. So that's where we've kind of ended up as well, is making a lot of money off war, and in so doing just really destroying any possibility of people being able to honor their dead in any humane kind of way, really, unless other than just having a body part that they can work with to do something with. um, and then again, there's just this these wars have created such mass trauma, and it's just hard to even imagine in these war zones all the how horrible everything, how they feel there. But in each of these situations, because of the huge number of deaths, none of these people were really allowed to honor the dead in the ways that their ancestors did before them. um, So, that's one more complex. The crime industrial complex is one that's really um, stuck with me for many years now. After I had a friend, a hospice colleague, and a friend of mine, she was shot and killed in a shopping mall in 2012 before Christmas. And as it turns out, it was 3 days before Sandy Hook, the mass shooting at Sandy Hook. So a lot of that was happening that week. But um, So I've been paying, I guess, extra attention now to just how homicides are treated, and how instead of becoming a place of a sacred event where a person has died, where a life has been brought to an end, it's a crime scene. And all these places are, then physically cordoned off with crime tape, and families are kept from, being anywhere near the body for to preserve the evidence that the police say that they need to preserve, um, and this doesn't only happen in with homicides, but it also happens with suicide. And I'll share a story of a friend of mine who shared with me when her brother committed suicide, how the mother, I mean, it was very clear that he had committed suicide because of what was there in the room and, whatever that form of suicide would um, show. But the mother was physically held back by the police officer, keeping her from being able to be with the body of her son again. Um, so these to me are clear signs that our society. I mean, again, I'm sure people have a good argument on why that should be and why the mother shouldn't have to mess anything up. But I just find it really very hard, very sad, and yeah. And anyway, so that's the crime industrial complex um, situation. And according to 2020 statistics, only like 50% of homicides are ever solved or were solved that year, I should say. And I don't think the number has improved. I think it's actually going down. Um, and that, makes US among the worst at solving murders in the industrialized world. And I know in Oakland, California, where I lived for a little while, the coroner's office, the morgue there was often just overfilled with bodies because I think of staffing shortages, but also of the rate of violence that went on in that city during certain periods of time. They just couldn't get to the bodies quick enough. So that meant that at times for weeks, the family would not even see that body. And so at least for me, when I consider that 50% of the homicides aren't ever solved, and then to put these families through this you know heartbreaking situation, uh, it just doesn't make sense to me that they should have to go through that when, again, the crime solving the homicides is just not a very um, is not very successful in this country. And as a matter of fact, I have a niece who's studying forensic analysis, and we were talking recently on how, the thumbprints are not even, I mean, fingerprints aren't all that reliable. There's so many reasons that they can't, they can get, uh, well, I can't remember the word right now that she used, but they can, they're just not reliable. And if that's what we're protecting, to, seeing, collecting fingerprints from the scene, it's just another kind of adding insult to injury in my mind. Anyway, I won't get into all that, but um, it just spoke to me that these people who have lost someone they loved weren't able to honor them in a way that they would have preferred to be able to do. Um, so, yeah. And as I learned with my friend Cindy's death, with each of these deaths, whether it's in the war or homicide or in the hospitals, there's always going to be ripple effects. And each person has their own family, their community. In the case of Cindy, she had her hospice colleagues. She had her patients who were dealing with their own kind of imminent death. And it's just the ripples are far-reaching. And so, again, by the fact that our society doesn't really accept death as a part of life, and has pretty much separated us from any chance of honoring the dead in a a way that was be similar to our ancestors. Um, the trauma is widespreading, and again renders us to be more of a lost society than a healthy one. And the last industrial complex that I wanted to bring up here was the entertainment industrial complex. And this chart here shows how well, so as it reads, correlation between movie censorship ratings and levels of on-screen violent content between 2020, 2023. And to the left, you'll see Norway, Finland, Sweden, Germany. And that pretty much means that they just don't really allow grossly violent films to be shown in their countries, and so because of that, they don't have that many grossly, violent films in their countries. But if you go over to the right side of the screen and go up 5 spots, you'll see that the United States is right there. The censorship isn't, you know, as we all know, there's violence in pretty much any movie you might see, whether it's a movie that's intended to be violent, like a disaster film, or whatever the other films can be, or just something that you wouldn't. Sometimes I'm really shocked that there's violence in films that I see. Um, but as it is, we're here in this very violent country, and our movies kind of mirror how it is in our society overall. So that was disappointing to see the United States ranking so low there, but so it is. And I think all all these things that have been pulling us away from our sacred acts of caring for our dead have kind of left us in a situation of, and I didn't see this film. I don't think I ever will, but I just think that's a pretty crazy idea. I have a film about zombie undead, but I do feel like it kind of speaks to how lost we are as a society, and so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I have felt for a long time that if a society that can't, accept that death is a honored part of life and is a sacred event, that it's not a society that will thrive. I do feel like in these dark times we're in right now, I think they all. I guess I meant to bring up in the beginning. I feel like our disconnection from death is quite possibly at the core of kind of our problems that we're facing in this country right now. I just feel like we've lost the sense of the sacred, of something that's so basic and so true. And for me, circle of life, when death is not acknowledged, it doesn't, it just can't thrive. It doesn't even really stay a circle. It just has the birth and life, which also lose their sacredness, I think, if we can't honor all of it. We can't honor really any of it. And yet, I know that birth um, still is often an event of great joy, and people can rise to that occasion. But anyway, the loss of our death rituals and of honoring of the dead like we used to plays a huge role in all that. So what is it that we might be able to do to kind of heal this wound? um, I like this Francis Weller quote from Wild Edge of Sorrow. And it says, "There's something about ritual that resonates deep in the bone. It's a language older than words, relying not so much on speech as on gestures, rhythms, movements, and emotion. In this sense, ritual addresses something far more primal than language." So I think when I read this, I think of like Rochelle in the hospitals in Canada offering the washcloths to the families, or even the families I've offered washcloths to. But just that act of offering a washcloth, I mean, that's all that was needed. And because somewhere deep in these people, they know what they need to do with that washcloth. It's in their DNA, it's in their bones, as it said here. Um, but without being given that opportunity, people don't know that that's what they can do. And because we don't embrace that anymore in our society, we lose the connection we once had of this sacred event here in our lives. So let's just talk about what maybe ways we can actually create some ways of mending the brokenness in our society. And I think that simple ritual is very much a possible a way that we can do that. And so for if you ask what is a ritual, it's a simple act, or maybe not simple, but it can be a very simple act that on a in some sense it's something you may do every day. But if you put the intention behind it of what you want to do and create a death ritual, then that's what it is. It's a ritual. It's this simple act, and that can be anywhere from you know, singing a song to lighting a candle or taking a deep breath or raising a glass to toast someone's, who's now gone, who's now dead. It can be anything. Anything can be a ritual if the intention is there. So, and I also believe that, like with, homicides and death and grief, ritual can also create a ripple effect of love and healing, if enough people, you know, do it, practice it. So yeah, so ritual. Here's another quote I wanted to quote from Sarah Kerr, who's a death doula and a healing. I think she calls herself a healing ritual practitioner. Um, the idea of when we meet death in a way that brings more love into the world, that helps everybody who is involved on this side of the river and the other, the ancestors, the living ones, the future ones. If we deepen our relationship between them and deepen village connection with them, the death can be difficult, but it can still be beautiful because we found something larger than ourselves. In the end, there's more love. And again, I think that that is what ritual is all about, is expressing love. Another thing that I heard Sarah Kerr say once in a interview is how ritual and love, when the village or community or family does this with the dead loved one, they pass that energy or whatever whatever you see. This is a new ancestor basically, and they're passing them with love onto the world of the ancestors that are beyond our physical world here. And I love that image of doing something of love to pass the body and then pass the loved one on to the next realm. Um, so, ritual. Okay, this I wanted to, in the beginning, I showed some signs and symptoms of a disconnected society. But here, for me, some things I observed were signs and symptoms of a healing society. And again, I expressed with kind of with one washcloth and how people would kind of understand how to take care of what they needed to do with the washcloth. We would, one washcloth, our group, we'll do occasionally receive thank you notes and people sharing their stories. But then again, I've witnessed people who've transformed from being lost and kind of shocked or whatever to being empowered and feeling like they actually were able to do something that showed that they loved that person one last time. So, I've had people telling me how grateful they were for that opportunity that they didn't even know was a possibility. And was my last job as a hospice nurse, I was a triage nurse. So I'd get a lot of phone calls, and a lot of them would include, family members calling to let me know that someone has died. And when I had the chance, I would always ask, how long do you want how long do you want to be with the body before the funeral home comes? And more often than not, people would say, oh, the sooner the better, or whatever, or they would have some reason to get the body out quicker than what I thought was a good idea. But they'd also have to wait for the nurse to come and pronounce the death. But oftentimes when I had a chance, I would encourage or suggest that the family, whoever was calling, to spend some time with the body. And it'll be, this is a once in a lifetime event, and once the body's gone, you won't have that chance again. And several people took me up on that suggestion. They did ask for a little more time than they were calling to ask for initially. But I wouldn't very often get calls back, or I wouldn't find out really what they did or anything. But on occasion, I would. And there was one time when I got a call back from the spouse of a man who had died the day before, and I had talked with him once the man, his partner, his spouse had died. I was talking about how it would be maybe beneficial to spend some time with them, and think about how you could honor his life before you sent him off with the funeral home. And so I found out the next day that he actually was very happy that they did that, because what the sister of the dead man did and his husband did was they decided to raise a glass to toast the man with using his favorite beverage. I don't remember what that was, but it's just a very simple act. They just, that was what they thought would honor him best at that moment. And it made a lot of difference. I mean, the man clearly was moved by that experience and very, very happy that they had done that. And so that was wonderful to hear. And as I mentioned before, the young man who had been murdered, um, and I helped his two friends put the chest part together, and then after we got them together, that part together, one of the friends came to me and said, we've got this. We're going to take over from here, and they did. They more friends came and just helped. They figured out how to make his head so they could put his favorite hat on. They put his favorite clothes on, which included a white undershirt and a white shirt, which I was like, oh my gosh, but that's what they chose. And whatever else they put on was just what they thought that he would want to have on. So, and then they kept the body for that was a Saturday afternoon, and they kept the body until Monday morning on dry ice, and they were able to honor that young man in their way. So, and again, we've received many stories with one washcloth on how important that time the people spent with their loved ones was when they used the washcloth to care for the body. So, these are just some observations. I'm guessing you might have some observations as well as of how you've seen home funerals to help families, or what other rituals you might think of or might have observed or experienced yourself. But it can come in many forms. Rituals, again, it's about the intention. It's not about following any, prescribed practice or anything. So the picture of the scarves, I was reading in Megry Anderson's book Sacred Dying how a young woman, after her mother was killed in a crash related situation, um, the daughter decided to decorate the mother's room with her scarves, and so she and some friends did that, and they just sat around and shared stories about the mother, and it just became a beautiful ritual for them and very healing in many ways. Other things you can do is cook a dish in honor of that person who's died, knowing that you're doing that and because you loved them and you just want to, honor them in that way. Or you can just light a candle. A simple act of lighting a candle can be a ritual in itself. So, I again, this is all to just stress how simple ritual can make a huge difference in the experience one has when a person has died. And yeah, so I feel like that was, oh yeah, yeah, Megry Anderson. I have this one last quote. And to keep in mind that you don't have to be with the body, although that is a pretty special thing to be with, is the body after a person's died. But according to Megry Anderson in her book Sacred Dying, neither actual time or distance matters. It's possible to be with the loved one in prayer and thought and through ritual at any point and still make a difference. So again, I feel like any act of love and ritual we can do when a person has died has the ripple effect of spreading that love and honor to a larger, to our society at large. It can help individuals heal. It can help our communities heal, and eventually, if the circle of the ripple gets large enough, it can help our society um, heal this disconnect from you know this disconnect from our ancestors and our ancestral ways. So with that, I'll just leave you with what our gift cards for One Washcloth include. Is that to follow your instincts. There is no right way. Anything you can do to send your deceased loved one off with love is important, and it can help heal and help you get into uh, the grieving process in a smoother way. So that's pretty much all I've got for you here. I hope we have some time now for questions or conversation. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, Susan. That was fascinating. I took so many notes.
Oh, good.
Um, and I just noticed Can you end your slideshow and then it'll open up the screen for us a little
Let
bit
me see,
more?
how do I, so, oh, end, stop share, right?
Yay. Good job.
Penny's my teacher here. Okay, great, great.
Yeah. Um, I'm going to take advantage of my host position and just share a really quick story and then open it up for questions or sharing. But I work at a funeral home, and I'm very fortunate that I work for an independent family owned funeral home. And we had a family the other day whose father died, and they kept pushing back when they wanted us to pick him up. And I was so happy. They kept him home from 10 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. And then the son said, my father loved karaoke. Can we do karaoke at his funeral service? And I said, absolutely. And so we turned the lobby of the funeral home into this karaoke DJ station. And it was so interesting because we had karaoke going on, and then we had the traditional funeral service going on, and then this feast in the back going on. So it was like three separate things. And my heart was so happy because it was so authentic and genuine. And the only reason it happened is because they asked the question. And they were very hesitant when they asked. They're like, I think we're asking for too much. And it was like, no, no, no. So I'm just so honored that I work at a funeral home where we say yes to those things. And I'm
Yeah,
hoping that trend, we help influence that trend. So I just wanted to share that story. Thank you for that opportunity.
yeah,
Um,
that's wonderful.
yeah, yeah.
It's like you
Um,
say, people just don't know. They just don't know even what to ask when a person dies. So yeah, it's wonderful to have funeral homes like yours.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I really appreciate it every day, but it also makes me sad because that's not the time to be having those conversations. I want them to know about this way ahead of time, and I think that's the problem we're all looking to solve here. So, um, yeah. So, who else wants to share a story?
Any comments that we can look at
I'm
here?
trying to
Oh,
find how to raise my hand and I can't, so I'll just jump in.
yay.
So I'm Nancy Ward, and I became a home funeral guide back in 2008, I think it was. And what prompted me was the death of my parents, which was in 2004, and they both died within 6 weeks of each other. And what was interesting for me was that, or traumatic, I should say, was that I was very prepared for their death, but I was not prepared for what came after. And I was so horrified by the body bag that I was standing there watching them put my father in a body bag, and everything in me just was saying, this is not right. And yet I had no idea what to say to stop it. What alternatives did I have? And it literally took me another 4 years before I learned about home funerals. And I will never forget it. I heard somebody say, having a home funeral. And it was like, oh my God, that's it. That's what I wanted. I didn't even have the words to articulate it. But when I heard them, I knew that that's exactly what was missing and why it was so traumatic. And no, 2 Sundays ago, I just attended here locally in Portland, Oregon, a documentary that was made by a man whose father died, and there were two death doulas in attendance at his father's funeral, at home funeral, and that they did this whole documentary. And I thought to myself while I'm watching it, how far we've come. It doesn't seem like we've made enough progress, but just the idea that somebody made a documentary and is now taking it out and showing it locally, it's like, wow, I think we all need to really be grateful for the work that all of us are doing, and that we'll be able to continue this. And I see there's a question about the name of the documentary, and I'm sorry, I don't remember it, but when I when I'm listening, I will look it up and I'll put it in the chat before we close out. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy. There's a comment from Pashta in here, and I'll read that. And she said, my sister-in-law went camping after our granddaughter died via suicide and asked the ocean to support her. Oh, that's so beautiful. She took the stone, shells, and seaweed that came to the shore and created a spiral out of it and brought me one of the shells. Oh, that's really beautiful. I was thinking, Susan, this kind of ties in with a question that I had, where I think oftentimes, we're so disconnected from any sort of ritual that we may have had. And I think identifying that a ritual can be something that just is a spur of the moment, or it can be something that's so simple. It's not this thing that has to be passed down. Ideally it's great if it was, but it doesn't have to be that. So do you guys sense that too, that sometimes people hear the word ritual and they just think it's some big ceremonial thing? And it's like, no, it can be as simple as putting on a pot of your grandmother's favorite tea. So like this, what Pasha just shared, sounds like it was kind of a spur of the moment, in the moment ritual that surfaced. And that is so beautiful. So how do we encourage people to do more of that?
I think that part of it is just the home funeral itself. It sort of automatically happens. Somebody walks into a room and they decide to light a candle, and slowly other people in the house kind of come around the candle or the bedside, and they either talk or they sing or they just sit in silence. I think the problem is we don't give ourselves enough time. I mean, we've been talking about that already, right? But a lot of it is simply time for the appropriate ritual to arise.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly agree on that. Time is definitely, people all seem like they have to be in a rush to get everything going and get everything taken care of, because that's just what our society has more or less programmed us to do. And even just thinking of like how businesses allow for like a 3-day bereavement period or something, to me that's just kind of very you know inhumane. I don't know. I don't think of a better word, but yeah, I think you're totally right, Pashta. Yeah. It's good to see you too, Pashta.
Susan, I'm gonna share a story too,
Please do.
if it's okay, because you're Lynn and Rochelle, and keep a stash of the one washcloths. And there was one home funeral I did a couple of years ago, and I really had doubts about this family. I mean, when I went over, they were going to bury the mother on their property. It looked like, if y'all are familiar with the show Sanford and Son, they were out in the country, pit bulls at the door. I thought, oh God, what have I done? Then it comes to the time I'm called and I have to go over there because she has died. And I'm explaining what's going to happen. I'm going to do we're going to wash the body. This is a ritual. This is a sacred space. And look, I have this one washcloth, and I'm going to start at the head and go to the feet. And so I start, the eyes. And then before I get to the mouth, one of the friends says, Sarah, can I do the heart? Can I do the heart part? Can I use the washcloth for the heart? Because she was really my good friend.
Mm.
I mean, it just happens, doesn't it? You think, are they going to get it? Why am I here? And then in a big way, they get it.
I have yet to do a home funeral where there aren't people witnessing but don't want to be involved.
Always.
They're hands on. By the time we finish the body, they are hands on.
Always. And you can't shut them up. They're going to talk. They're going to start telling story every time, Pashta, every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, that reminded me of a story. And again, you know, home funerals are fabulous. But I think one of the things that drew me into the one washcloth, you know, idea is just how just that moment of using a washcloth. I mean, to me, that just kind of speaks to what home funerals are all about. Because for me, a washcloth, you know, not only gives people permission to touch the body, it also gives them time to be with the body. They can just slowly, you know, they can take all the time they want just to slowly wipe the face or whatever. And it's just a way of, you know, passing the love on. But that just Sarah talking just now reminded me of another a story that I often think about, especially when I'm talking about one washcloth. And after my father died 5 years ago, his hospice nurse, I introduced her to the idea of one washcloth, and she really was taken by it, and she wanted to be in my parents' home when my father died, and we kind of gave him some body care, and you know, for a while we kept in touch, and at some point she shared with me a story about she was a hospice nurse and she was doing a call. She was called to a home because the person on hospice was just coming home from the hospital and basically coming home to die. You know, there was no chance of him lasting very long at all. And so there's a large family there when she arrived, and the body, you know, the patient arrived shortly thereafter. And it was very clear that there were like minutes before he was going to be gone. And sure enough, he did die. But she thought of, you know, one washcloth and the importance of giving people permission to participate in this somehow. And all she saw was a box of disposable wipes in the room, and that was kind of it. So she just, you know, created this ritual, putting the intention into this box of wipes, and just went from person to person in the room. And they, you know, those who wanted to took the wipe and gave the loving care that they apparently, you know, they needed to do. And that was, you know, a very beautiful story for me, because it's certainly one washcloth. You know, none of us, all of us here from one washcloth agree that it's never been about the washcloth. You know, it's never about the washcloth. You know, you can use an old sock if you need to. You know, you can use whatever you want, but it's just about giving people permission to touch and be with that body, and spend time with that body and offer some sort of love. But again, you know, ritual comes in all forms. It's just that the washcloth, you know, creates a ritual just by you know, by everybody recognizing what a washcloth is for. And it goes direct, you know, like the woman, like I was sharing, how, you know, it's just in our DNA what we do with a washcloth, as it is, I think, with any of these rituals. It's just in our DNA to honor the dead in some way.
Hi, Lynn. Did you have a question or a comment?
I was just going to share another little short story. Was I worked at an inpatient hospice facility, and a mother died, and her, you know, mature adult daughters were at her side, and we did the ritual bath there. And I would always say, you know, we can just do whatever you want to do, you know, the forehead, the hands, whatever. And then just step back. And these two women just were so thorough, even to her genitals, and they were in awe, and they said, that's where we came out from. You know, just every part they were getting into. And it was an honor to be just in the background during that.
I've yet to have a home funeral where the family didn't want the body naked and to do the whole thing. And one of the specialists for me was a woman who was late 30s, died of COVID. She was at the coroner's office while they confirmed it was COVID, and then she was brought home. She had 3 children, 3, 5, and 8, 7 or 8. The 5-year-old wasn't handling things well at all, so he went off to this kindergarten teacher. But the 8-year-old spent all the time we were doing the body care. She was laid out on naked on the dining room table. She spent her whole time with us, she ended up brushing her mom's hair and then washing her mom's hair and helping us dry, like we had done. Her husband and the woman's husband and I were doing the washing of the body. She came and did the drying. And meanwhile, the 3-year-old was running around us talking and talking and talking and talking, and coming up with things like she'd get on the piano, which was right beside us, and she'd get off and she'd come to me and she said, Mommy talks to me after I play the piano. Why isn't she talking? I said, because she's dead, sweetie, and she can't talk anymore. Oh, and then run around us some more, and then there'd be another question. And a week later, I was just checking in with the husband, and he told me that she had said to him several days after we had done the death care, she came up to him and said, Daddy, when is Mama going to stop being dead? So she didn't quite get it, but it just, to me, really, really proved, is not the right word I want to use, but I can't think of another one, proved that children should be allowed to be involved the way they want to be involved. And I think that's really, really important.
Mhm.
So it looks like Nancy shared the name of the documentary. It's called Out of the Shadows, and not sure if it's available yet. So y'all have the name of that now. I have a question for you, Susan. And we talk a lot about giving permission and opportunity. And I experience that every day in the funeral home. And I host discussion groups and death cafes, and we're very, us here in San Diego, our little doula collective, we're very community facing, community friendly. I just feel like sometimes we're just landing on deaf ears though, like it can be frustrating sometimes because we're kind of trailblazing and trying to bring back the old and make it new again. So I don't know, does anybody have any success stories on how you've been able to unlock that once the permission's given, eyes open and minds start opening up as well? How do we just unlock more of that? Go ahead, Pashta. You got an answer for me?
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily one you have to use, but I decided to get involved in some social networking that sounded kind of interesting. It's done like speed dating, but you're actually networking. You're supposed to talk about your business, but the passion behind it, not sell it. And you do this like 7 minutes. They take you out in a breakout room. They take you out. They throw you in another one. And you do it for an hour. And 95% of the people, unfortunately, are USers, not Canadians, as I am. But 95% of them, when I start talking about what I do, say, I'm not going to talk about my business. You go on. I want to know more. And then they've connected with me afterwards. And it was not what I expect. I did not expect to be doing this to educate, right? But it was amazing how many people went, oh, wow, I didn't know that was possible. Tell me more about it. So I think it just finding some kind of forum that that you can speak in a way that, like with this forum, we're supposed to talk about what we do, right? So I'm not imposing on anybody. But the interest that's come out of that has been really quite amazing. I'm really surprised.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's actually a really brilliant idea. It's a really good idea. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I guess what comes to mind too is, the break in between our ancestors and us was so abrupt, that there's just a shock that has gone through our society because of it. And and it just is going to take time. I mean, I was hoping that things would be changing a lot quicker when I first started getting into this work, but it's just going to take time. And ripple effects, again, I think that, Pashta's story, I mean, everybody's story, it's like people are going to go home and talk about what Pashta shared. It's not just one person that you're reaching. It's their community, and at some point it's going to click. It's just hard to know how quickly that's going to happen. So, but again, just simple ritual. Doing simple, non-threatening things that welcome and you know welcome people in is the way to go, and talk about it as often as you can when it's appropriate. So.
I would also like to share something too that just, we have this thing about how it's become, we've totally lost it. But really, in some cases, it's only one generation away. I was in a longevity program that's Canada-wide. Have to go have a bunch of tests. So I was in with the nurse getting some blood tests, and she said, am I allowed to talk about the button that you have on your coat? I said, yes. Button that says, ask me, what is a death midwife? And she told me that her father took care of his father at home and did all of the death care, and that that some part of the family, I don't know who it was, took care of the grandmother at home. And that so that was only one generation away. And especially in rural areas, it isn't even that. When I was talking to people in the Yukon about what the regulations are, and I was talking about transport of dead bodies, and they said, oh, we don't even have permits. Everybody transports dead bodies. Everybody does home funerals here, right? So we kind of need to connect with those people. And it was just one of my students was just gave me some information about the Dutch traditions, and that's their norm, is to do home funerals. So I think we need to sort of connect that information, right, for people to understand that it isn't lost, and we're not that far away from that knowledge.
I wish we still lived in a world where you could transport your loved one. Yeah, I'm sure, I know there are places where you can. Unfortunately, like where I live in San Diego, it's a small area with over 1 million people. And I asked at our health department once if a family could come in and file their own death certificate. And they looked at me like I was a wackadoodle. They were like, lady, what are you talking about? So because all the funeral homes and the medical institutions are required to populate the information via EDRS, our electronic death registry system. And so I find oftentimes that families maybe want to do home funeral, but they know they either have to be partnered with a funeral home in order to get permitting done, or they've got to have somebody that they know at the county health department office. So does anybody else face any other, I'm sorry about the dog barking in the background, by the way. Has anybody else faced any other obstacles where they live in actually getting to be able to do home funerals?
Certainly when I first started out, everything was an obstacle because nobody'd heard of it except the Office of Vital Statistics. Now, I don't know how it is in California, but in Oregon, they knew all about it. They had all the forms. They would provide you with a death certificate to fill out yourself, but you did have to have it signed by a doctor, obviously. But no, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Just the difference from state to state. And I think the reason we've never lost it here is exactly what Pashta was talking about, and that is rural communities tend to be so much more connected to death. And we have lots of rural communities in Oregon. Yeah, it's amazing the obstacles that are there for some people and not for others. But it sounds like your funeral home is one that would be happy to work with families who want to do home funerals, and that is something I hope you guys play up, because yeah, it's all about getting the information out there. Just like with me, people don't know what they don't know, and they may be searching and don't know where to find what it is they're looking for. So you can't do enough outreach. In fact, I think in Oregon, that's all we did for like 5 years. Nobody ever had any business. We just were all doing outreach all the time. Yeah. And slowly by slowly, and way too slowly for anybody's liking, it begins to take hold.
Well, thank you for that, because it reinforces that, we've been at it for about a year, and we have a little collective formed here. We get some doula work, but we haven't been able to secure a home funeral. So I am hoping that the funeral home can help, because our Department of Vital Statistics, they want everything electronic. They're not as nice as yours. So maybe we can win them over eventually. But yeah, we're just going to keep at it and see what happens. But thank you for affirming that we're doing what everybody else is doing.
I like the idea of Pashta with her button too. I mean, I think, wearing something that sparks, conversations is a big idea. And there was a time when I used to make buttons, but I've lost my button making machine. So I'll have to figure out another way to get some buttons with those kind of, comments on them.
And
I
often,
think I think you need to tell them what the button said, Susan.
Oh, well, I've made a lot of buttons in my time, Nancy.
Yeah.
But I guess the first one I made was, "Yep, it's true, die we do." Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah, that was a good one. But yeah, I guess that would still be good. But anyway, I like Pashtas as well.
it was amazing how many people, if I stood back and didn't answer right away, they would answer. So, I'd be buying something and the clerk would look at the button, say, "Oh, okay." And he'd read out the button and say, "Oh, you mean blah, blah, blah. You mean like birth midwifery, except the other end. You do the same kind of personal stuff, right?" But that, you got it, like in the simplest form, of course. But it was amazing how many people clued in to what the button meant without me explaining it.
What did you say that first button said? I didn't.
It said, "Yep, it's true, die we do."
Die we do. Yes, that's true. Die we do.
Yep,
Okay.
yep,
Thank
it's
you.
true. Yep, it's true.
A couple comments from the chat box. Diane says that there's a great movie called In the Parlor. And they've written an interactive play called Soul's Journey to get community to attend. I feed them dinner. Oh, Diane, do you want to unmute and share a little bit about that? Because that sounds fascinating. Maybe not. I don't know if Diane's able to. I'm really curious about that. And Susan, I don't know if you saw the comment that April met you at an early NHFA meeting where you were giving away buttons. Oh, Diane's in the car. Okay. Yeah. Oh, people want a copy of your play, Diane. So maybe you can email it to, well, we'll give you those 3 minutes and then you can tell us how to share. How about that? Because we still have time. Yeah, I'm curious about that too. Okay, thanks, Diane. Susan, did you have a book that you were going to mention while we're waiting
Oh,
for Diane?
well, I was realizing I hadn't, and I mean, if Rochelle is still here, I thought it'd be really nice for her to give us a little summary of this book, Corpse Care, for all of you who haven't read it before. Rochelle was part of the research team that kind of brought this information together. So if Rochelle's up for it, I would love for her to let her do that.
Sure. Thank you,
Thank you,
Susan, for
Rochelle.
giving me a chance to tell people about it. So Susan showed us her copy, and I don't know if you could tell, but it had library codes on it and everything. She asked her public library to get it in, and they did. So that's something that you might consider if you're interested in reading it. So it's called Corpse Care: Ethics for Tending the Dead, written by Cody Sanders and Michael Parsons. And like Susan said, I was part of the research team that did sort of the background research with a 3-year grant that we got to do that. I'll just read you a brief review of the book by Billy Campbell, who is the co-founder and co-director of Ramsey Creek Preserve, the first green burial cemetery in the US. And he says, Corpse Care is a deep dive into the history and present practices of how we relate to and treat the physical remains of humans. It's fascinating how culture, philosophy, and theology have shaped these practices, and how these practices can affect our relationship with the natural world. The book shows that seeing the corpse as part of the web of life can help end our destructive assault on that web. I read most of it in one sitting. While I have read death studies for decades, I still found this book revelatory and intensely interesting. So it is a book that is written from a Christian perspective, but I think it's relevant to anyone interested in the political history or ethics of care for our dead. It names some larger political, social, economic, ecological, and theological implications for the way that we deal with the dead. And just as a sort of a taste of some of the subtopics, there's a section called The Erasure of the Indigenous Corpse, the Black Corpse on US Streets, the transgressive HIV/AIDS corpses. So there's a definite intention of kind of weaving in these different themes. And I think in that sense, it's very similar to Susan's presentation today, where you might say, what does the military industrial complex have to do with home funerals? I mean, and yet it does. And I think that, and Susan really showed us in her presentation how these things are all interwoven and important in understanding. And so that's, I think, what this book does as well. Corpse Care addresses a lot of those concerns in addressing why the body matters. And I think that's sort of in many ways, something we've kind of talked around tonight, that in our culture, the body has just become meaningless to the point of, ridiculousness, where a parent dies across the country and there's a direct cremation and their ashes get mailed, through the US Postal Service across the country to, sit on a shelf in someone's home. It just seems just so devoid of any of that ritual that Susan's describing. So I think this book is a great opportunity to sort of reflect on those things, like why does the body matter? Why does it matter what we do with the body when someone dies? So thank you for letting me just tell you about that. And if you're interested, I'll type the title and the authors in the chat just so everyone can see that. Thanks.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for sharing about that. Okay, we got Diane. You ready to share about
Hello,
this?
can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Can you hear me?
You're good.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear us?
Yes, okay. There you are.
You're good. Yeah.
Okay. I started a nonprofit. I'm Mohawk from Akwesasne, and I started by educating my community members in end of life training. And I do different projects in the community, but I love this movie. And you have to buy it right from um, the people. If you go online, you'll be able to find it. But this is an amazing movie to show. It talks about natural burial, it talks about wakes, which we still do. It talks about natural burials, everything. It is a real good movie. It gives the history and everything of burials. Um, I have a very hard time getting people to participate in our community. So we tried sewing classes, craft classes, ice cream night, all different things. But the people, it's so private to people grief work. So I wrote a play, and it's called Soul's Journey, and it's based upon our native belief system of when we are with the Creator and we volunteer to come down to the earth, and He shows us what we are going to endure, and we come down to learn our teachings. So then they review the teachings with us, and then we take our journey to the earth, and then when we go back, we tell them what we learned. So it's a interactive play. Um, I just show it on people. Here's your part, and we go at it. And it's a lot of fun because people are giggly and embarrassed, or they don't know what to say or anything. So, but I try to make it fun. But how I gather people is to pay for a dinner for them. So we have a local caterers around, and so I just get the hall for free, and then I feed them. And food's the main attraction in my community.
Where do you live, Diane?
I live, if you know Cornwall, I live exactly between Montreal and Ottawa. If you come right down the middle of them, come down to the States, that's where I am. My reserve is in Quebec, Ontario, and New York State. Yeah.
I'm an Ottawa Valley girl, Diane.
Huh?
I'm an Ottawa Valley girl. Grew up
Oh,
in,
yeah.
grew up
So
in
you
Kempville.
Yeah. Yeah. So I find it's very challenging to get community into any kind of um, like weekly programming or anything like that. If they do, it's individual, or maybe two of them will do it at one time, but not as a group, like support groups. It that hasn't worked in my community. Um,
I
what?
love the idea of the impromptu play that you
Yeah.
can just assign a role, like that makes it easy, and then also it gives people that permission to kind of, assume that alter ego and step into that role. So I think that's brilliant. That is actually really brilliant. Yeah.
And two, the first line on their part is, "Please read, and if you would like to change it, please do so."
Mm.
You know, to make it their own. So, I'm always surprised that just as long as it's in the same topic, then. But
Yeah.
I have learned that doing radio stations talks has really helped put the word out. And we have a traditional government, a tribal, and a ban office. And I find that, like the home care programs, I trained all the home care programs now. And they're referring patients and stuff, and the seniors, and even our faith healers have talked about how what I talk about goes into their condolences. So it's the community is a buzz. So that's the big thing I can say about it that has been successful for us is that at least people are talking about death.
Man, I hate to cut these conversations short because I feel like we could be on here all night. There's just so much good information. But we are running it a little over. Diane, I just want to say thank you because I feel like you just kind of summed it up really well. You know, like the fruits of our labor are coming to fruition. We just have to keep at it and keep doing what we're doing and bring that creativity in. If you want to share the kind of the bones of your play, you know, I think some people might be interested in maybe doing something like that on their own. So I can shoot you an email and maybe we can connect and talk
Okay.
a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. I think you know, there was a lot of community and a lot of good stories shared, and we thank you. And Susan, I'm going to let you wrap us up.
Okay, well, I just want to reiterate the thank you. And I would love to hear about Diane's play as well, some more. It really is a beautiful idea. But I hope that I conveyed a little bit about what I came here to do this evening, and just want to encourage you all, you know, um, no matter the situation, if somehow you can just bring that simple ritual into it, I think that the ramifications can be pretty extraordinary if we all just kind of had that in mind, the power of a ritual. So yeah, thank you all for coming. And yeah, I enjoyed this conversation at the end too. Thanks for hosting, Penny.
Yeah, thank you. Diane, I just sent you my email address in the chat if you catch that.
Okay.
And then this recording will be available. I think I'm not sure when, but yeah, a lot of really good nuggets tonight. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you all for joining us. And I will share a closing that I got from my local Zen center, and they say, "May your life go well," and it makes me laugh because I think, what? So, may your life go well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.